Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed certified trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from survivors all over the world as they share their impactful story of thriving in their post-traumatic growth. We explore resources, tools, and coping skills to support the trauma survivor community. Enjoy. Hey friends, just a quick message before we dive into another amazing episode. So I just wanted to let you know about our upcoming workshop for July. And actually, we're going to keep it really simple. We're going to keep it rolling with navigating difficult relationships. So if you missed June's workshop, it's going to be a second chance for you to sign up in July for Wednesday, July 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Still $15 only per person. And this workshop was dedicated in June. My same message is going to be that it's summertime and we're together with a lot of family. There's a lot of weddings, there's a lot of barbecues, there's a lot of get-togethers, and the summer is still rolling. And why not keep it simple by keep navigating those difficult relationships? The summer's heating up, but you do not have to. So this workshop is dedicated to resiliency techniques, regulation techniques, keeping yourself calm, cool, and collected, learning proper boundaries, healthy internal resources to keep yourself in a sane place, even when you have to deal with some of those very difficult or possibly toxic or even abusive people. Maybe you've gone no contact or low contact with people, and now you're coming face to face at family functions with them. So I'm just going to keep it simple and we're going to keep rolling. And July 17th is going to be the same workshop as last month. So if you've already attended, you can join again if you'd like, no problem. But if you missed your chance in June, jump in again for July 17th. I look forward to seeing you there. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed trauma recovery and lifestyle design coach. I have with us today, Robin Bartlett. Robin, thank you so much for joining us. Robin grew up in a military family. His grandfather, father, and brother all attended West Point, but after 13 elementary and middle schools and 4 high schools, he decided he had had enough of the military. But in college, as the Vietnam War escalated and 18-year-olds were being drafted daily, he joined his college's ROTC program and fell back into that familiar routine. Upon graduating as a distinguished military graduate, he volunteered for the Infantry, Airborne, and Ranger training and was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Promoted to lieutenant after only 1 year, Robin was only 22 years old during the height of the Vietnam War. He was assumed the leadership of 1st Platoon, A Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Calgary, 1st Calgary Division Airmobile. Over the next 7 months, he led a platoon on more than 60 helicopter combat assaults and search and destroy missions. He holds a BA from Claremont McKenna College and a master's in media from Pace. He's written a number of business publications and now a memoir called Vietnam Combat Firefights and Writing History. He's also the president of the New York and New Jersey chapter of the 1st Calgary Division. He and his wife live in New Jersey and have 3 sons, none of whom have pursued military careers. Robin, thank you for joining us today. Let's dive right in. So you grew up obviously as a military kid. What was that like, the moving around? How come you decided to not go the route of so much of your was sending you on?
Well, as indicated, that West Point was very much a factor in my family. Yeah. Frankly, we on telephone at home, Colonel Bartlett's quarters, may I help you, sir? That's how you answered the phone in a military family. And again, I went to so many elementary and middle schools, 4 different high schools. We moved every 2 to 3 years, lived in Europe for 4 years. And I had really had enough. I wanted to stay in one place. Yeah. And military was not something I was about at the time. My father got me an appointment to West Point, but I turned it down. So at that point in time, early in the Vietnam War, that was not the direction for me. However, people were being drafted. My classmates were being drafted during the summer months. And I knew that A, I had to serve an obligation, but B, I did not wish to be drafted. And I was going to serve as an officer, preferably in the Army. Though that tells you which side of the field we sat on during the Army-Navy game, right?
Can you tell us what is the difference between enlisting voluntarily versus being drafted?
So during the they didn't have enough soldiers who volunteered to go into the Army. Yeah. And so they were drafted. And it was they needed a lot of soldiers, so the draft was a big thing. And if you did not have certain criteria that allowed you to be deferred, young men were being directly into the Army and into the more than likely into the infantry, unless they had some special skills that they could apply. Often, when a person was received their draft notification, they would go down and enlist in hopes of having a little more choice as to what branch of service they might go in. Maybe they decided they would go crazy and become a Marine or Air Force, or, if they went into the Army, perhaps they had a skill, mechanics, and being in my service, we called them grunts. We were grunts, infantrymen. Yeah. And that was the toughest job there was, as far as the Army was concerned.
Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's really about kind of making your own choices if you enlisted. So you did that before you ever ended up drafted, because you would have ended up in that place. So that's really smart, because that gave you a lot of options and opportunities back to make up your own mind. If you had to do it, you might as well be saying where you want to go, right?
Yeah, and I went through the ROTC program, which was affiliated with my college. So I went I learned the military skills that were taught, and upon graduation, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. So I achieved that objective of being an officer. And at the time, here I was, 21 years old, a brilliant college graduate, knowing everything there is to know, right? Yeah. So I decided that I wanted to challenge myself with the most arduous thing that I could think of at the time. And that was choosing volunteering for infantry, airborne, ranger training, and assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division. Wow. So I went 180-degree turn. Let's put it that way.
It sounds like it. I found it interesting in your bio, as I read, you kind of went back, and this became going back to something that was so familiar to you. So was there still the fears and the jitters and the, how is this going to end? And I don't really want to do this. Was that still happening? Or when you fell into the familiar routine of the military, was that calming for you and bringing your brain to a place that it's been so many times? You grew up in this.
It's a good question. Nobody's ever really asked me that before. I would say that at the time, with the training that I had, and distinguished military graduate, I considered myself a, quote, badass and really tough guy, right? But the fears and concerns, I mean, I knew what was going to happen to me. I knew I was going to be assigned to Vietnam. It was just a path for me to follow. And I knew about that. And after I returned to the 82nd Airborne Division, I was there about 6 months and did, in fact, receive orders to go to the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam. They wanted to keep airborne officers, paratroopers, in airborne units if they could.
Wow. Wow. So it sounds like you had like this pride, and you knew that you were good at it, and you knew that you were going to kick some ass. But the fear, obviously, of going to war is still going to be there. The neuroscience there, your brain really doesn't like unfamiliar. It's actually more scary to be in something unfamiliar and unpredictable. So if you fall into something that's familiar, even if it's a coping skill that's unhealthy for you, or in this case, this military routine that your brain's so familiar with, it actually feels safer and more calm in that place, because it recognizes, oh, we know how to do this. And there's almost like a capability that arises, and your brain's like, no, we're safe, even if it's terrifying. And even if it's for some people, a lot of trauma survivors, like a coping skill that is no longer healthy, that is actually hurting you. If your brain is familiar with it, it's actually more scary to try the new healthy thing than it is to stay with the unhealthy familiar thing. So that's why I asked that question there, because
I think you're absolutely right. And the training that I had, especially Ranger School, was the best insurance policy that one could have to go to Vietnam. It was incredible training. It was the best training the Army had to offer. It still is.
Yeah.
And I went to Vietnam feeling very confident as far as the training and the preparation that I had. Yeah. But of course, in training, we weren't using live bullets, right?
Right, exactly.
That was the difference.
Yeah. So take us to that place in Vietnam. So now you are You're there now. You've got a platoon that you are leading and over 60 missions, right? What was that like in such a short time? How is that even possible? So in such a short time to be commanding so many missions?
So when I joined my battalion and went with three other officers to the battalion commander's office, we went in alphabetical order. So I went in first.
Mm.
And the S1, who is the personnel officer of the unit, said to me, "I see that you were an S1, a personnel officer in the 82nd.
Yeah.
So you'll be coming out of the field. An officer typically spent 6 to 7 months in the field and then came out to a staff job." And he said, "We'll make you the S1 when you come out of the field because that's about the time I'll be going home. That is, if you survive." Because the life expectancy of a new lieutenant was 90 days. And so when I went in to report to the battalion commander with three other officers, the battalion was dead on his feet. He was exhausted in his bunker, and all he wanted to do was go to sleep.
Yeah.
And he gave us a 2-minute speech. I have no idea what he said. And then he asked the S1, "Well, where do we need these officers?" And the S1, the personnel officer, said, "We need one in A, two in B, and one in C."
Mm.
So went down the line, and I was assigned to A, the next two to B, and the third one. Those other three officers didn't. They were all either killed or wounded. I was the only one to survive my tour, and what I did to survive, I think, helped me a great deal. I did a couple of things that were maybe a little bit different, but I was assigned company with a great deal of anxiety. Let's put it that way. Tremendous anxiety.
Yeah. Can you share with us some of those things that you did that you felt were different, that were helpful?
I did three things. Number one was I sat down with my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders, and I said, "You guys have had more experience doing this than I am. I'm still going to be the leader, but if you see me doing something wrong, I want you to tell me. I want you to feel confident to tell me." And in Vietnam, you wore no insignia, no patches, no saluting, no sir. My name was either LT, which stood for lieutenant, or my call sign was Foggy Day 16. So often we referred to each other by numbers. I was 16. My platoon sergeant was 15. So that was the first thing I did. The second thing I did was I tried very, very hard not to do stupid stuff. Now, that may sound funny, but it was really easy to do stupid stuff. For example, I had a fellow officer who had been with me in the 82nd Airborne Division, and he was bringing in a helicopter using hand signals because the helicopter pilots can't see the ground as they're coming down. So they need direction from someone in front of them to land the helicopter on the landing zone where they want the bird to land.
Yeah.
And this officer stood on a mound to bring the helicopter in. And when the helicopter landed, the rotor blades took off his head.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And then the third thing that I did was we most often, because of heavy, deep jungle, that was the area that we were in near the Laotian border. We moved in file, and we were out along a line, 28 to 32 people. My point man and cover man were out in front of me 50 meters, but I always trusted my point man. And if they would call me forward, and they would say, I just don't the feel. I mean, it could be a sixth sense, or maybe there were no birds, no monkeys chirping. And what I would do is shoot artillery out in front of us in position. This was called reconnaissance by fire. And it gave us a little greater sense of security once the artillery had fired in front of us. In fact, I shot so much artillery, they put a budget on me of 25 rounds. I couldn't shoot more than 25 rounds, but that was enough to make people feel more comfortable and confident about moving into an area. And the point man and cover man were at greatest risk because they either saw the ambush before it happened or saw the booby trap before it was triggered, or they did. It was a very dangerous position.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of trust involved, of course, with that, and trusting that they are trusting their gut instinct. So there's a lot of, man-to-man trust happening here, which is, it sounds really, really important. I know you say we're going to get to your memoir in a minute, but in the memoir, on your website, you say that it expresses the fear, the anguish, and sometimes the illogical humor of war. Can you talk a little bit about that humor aspect? How does that play a role in your sanity while you're there, your healing when you're coming home? Is it just levity for the other guys? Is it for you internally? What does that look like?
Well, the book was written, each chapter was written sort of like as not sort of, as an individual experience that I had, it stands alone as a story.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a number of things that happened to me, unusual things that happened to me. Some of them were really quite horrific, and others were just kind of crazy war stories types of things. For example, when a new man joined the unit, he was called an FNG. That stands for effing new guy. And you were an effing new guy for about 6 weeks or so, until you became acclimatized to the heat, learned the protocols of the platoon, and began. Usually there was a firefight, and then once you survived one firefight, you had a little better sense of what it was like to be under fire, to be in a firefight.
Yeah.
So we had one FNG that joined our unit, and we happened to be at a base camp. They brought us into a base camp usually every 4 to 6 weeks. In other words, we would be out in the boonies we called it humping the boonies for 4 to 6 weeks. And you wore the same clothes for those 4 to 6 weeks. You did not change clothes.
Oh, boy.
So we were pretty ripe when you came in, and finally got a shower and got cleaned up. So one of the things that they did in Vietnam to handle the latrine was that they built these wooden latrines and they were two holers, two people could go in at a time, and they were elevated. They were built out of wood and they were elevated. And underneath each hole was a half of a 55-gallon drum cut in half.
Okay.
And the job of the FNG each day was to go and get diesel fuel in a canister, pull the dirty cans out, put in clean cans, and then pour the diesel fuel into the dirty cans and burn it. So that's how you disposed of the waste. However, this FNG got confused, and instead of getting diesel fuel, he got gasoline. And when he struck a match and threw it into the can, it exploded, blowing refuse 50, 60 feet into the air and covering the whole area. So it also burned down the latrine. So he spent the next week on latrine duty and helping the engineers rebuild the latrine. So that's one of the unusual kind of things, crazy things that happen.
Oh my gosh, he made a poop bomb. He didn't mean to do that.
He did. He made a big poop bomb.
Then he's week on duty paying for his sins. Oh my word.
Some of us who witnessed this laughed so hard that we were falling down. It was so funny. Fortunately, we were far enough away that we didn't get hit.
Wow. Oh my, yeah, I bet the people who did get hit probably didn't think it was quite as funny in the moment. They probably laughed at it though after, because it is really funny.
Especially if you were latrine at the time it burned down. Yeah, that was kind of scary.
Right. The Vietnam War was one of those that the Americans at home saw a lot of footage of it, right? When the news ended there, and that was a really big deal. It was a big turning point for the war, and we know that particular war was extremely controversial in that time in its space, right? But when you think that there has to be moments of levity, I totally understand why it is. And trauma survivors, a trauma recovery coach, working with anybody who's going through the horrible things, there is moments of levity, and there's also moments of thankfulness and moments of joy, because you can't just be in it all the time. Your brain would explode being in that constant place. It really takes you to a dark, depressed place, and you can't find moments like these of levity. So it's great that you were able to. We also know how difficult this war was, and coming home was a whole different animal, right? So what was that like for you transitioning back home, and how much longer did you stay in service and in this after you came home?
Well, before I touch on that, I just want to mention, some of the trauma that you experienced as an leader, and as the leader, one of the most difficult jobs that I had was to take care of the dead. And when we had dead soldiers, it became my responsibility to take care of the body. And my men would bring the body or bodies back. And these were soldiers who had been shot or killed or a result of fragmentation, however they may have died. And they did not want to do what was necessary to prepare the body to be placed on a helicopter for the long journey home. That became my job as the platoon leader. And the first this happened, I call it my first worst day in Vietnam. It necessitated the pockets of the dead soldier, making sure there wasn't anything there that shouldn't be, and putting personal possessions in a plastic bag, putting that on the soldier's chest. And my medic gave me what we called a death card. And it was basically just a 3x5 card with a hole punched in it and a piece of string. And the Army wanted me to put the name and serial number of the soldier on it. But for the first time, I think, they tried to put down the coordinates as closely as possible as to where that soldier died, so that there was actually on the ground, in the event they wanted to know where that body had been killed. We did not have body bags, so we had ponchos, and I would ran in the poncho. And now, when a helicopter came in, they would be bringing us food and ammunition and water, and then once that was offloaded, you would put the dead on board. But you had to be very careful of the rotor wash. And the worst thing would be if this poncho came loose and went up into the rotors, and it would potentially damage the helicopters. So I carried a ball of twine, and my job was to tie off the head and the waist and the feet. And then the death card and one dog tag was attached to the man's boot so that he could be identified. And then they went back to Graves registration. So that was a very traumatic experience for me, and it happened numerous times. And that was the toughest job I had to do in Vietnam.
Wow. I would imagine, and something like that doesn't get easier, but I imagine that there's a bit of desensitization or dissociation or numbness that happens when you have to keep doing that over and over and over again. Did you experience that?
Absolutely right. That's exactly what I did. I took all of those experiences and I locked them away in the titanium steel trunk in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And that's where they stayed for 20 years. 20 years, and all of a sudden started to leak out. And I started to experience not nightmares per se, but daydreams. And I couldn't control them. I actually began to experience some of these events where they're up close and personal. Not shooting artillery far in advance, but I'm talking about 25 feet, 10 feet, and very close encounters.
Yeah.
And those experiences really started to traumatize me and bother me. Yeah. Was fortunate to have a psychiatrist friend who my civilian career was in publishing. Yeah. And I had helped her to get her book published. And I just happened, did a lot of traveling. And so I just happened to be in her area, and I said, let's have dinner. And by the way, the next day I want to have a professional meeting with you. And I met with her for about 3 hours, and I told her what was going on in my life with these daydreams that were coming back to haunt me, and I couldn't control them. And she gave me some very simple exercises to practice. And while the experience didn't go away, it allowed me to control them, and it didn't bother me quite. It softened the situation and didn't so much.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, right? The trauma science there, of course, is that when something gets locked away, it becomes a memory until it unrepresses itself. And for some people that never ever happens, and for some people that happens during just normal waking life. Sometimes it is during sleep, sometimes it's during different modalities of therapy. They're trying to understand, why am I feeling this way? And these memories can come back during those, more intrapsych models and modalities. And repressed memories coming back, and or emotional flashbacks are really your brain's way of saying, it's time. Hi, Robin, it's time. You need to process this now, because it's hurting us to hold on to it. This is stuck in your body, it's stuck in your brain, and we really need to start processing it. So I'm glad that you had that support through that, because that is the emotional flashbacks, these daydreams that you're having they are very, very upsetting, because you're back in the space as
Well,
if
and you don't feel in control of your life.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that alone is super scary, just for that to happen in general, even if it wasn't due to these emotional flashbacks. So that is great that you had the support from there. I always like to ask our guests before we dive into, I want to talk a little bit more about the memoir, but I'm just going to bump to what we always do, is almost the last question, but we're kind of talking about this resource that you had with her. I'm wondering what other resources were impactful and helpful in this healing journey that you've been on.
So I wrote the book. Well, of course, I had a family to raise, so I didn't have a tremendous amount of time
Mm,
to sit down and write the book. But I had a job that took me on long airplane flights from coast to coast,
yeah.
and I would get my laptop out, as long as it wasn't too bumpy,
Yeah.
and work on a chapter. Now, my favorite author is Stephen King. And he wrote a wonderful little book called On Writing, which is not a horror story.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book for writers or for anybody who wants to write well. And in that book, he talks about falling into the typewriter as opposed to a laptop, meaning that you become so engrossed in what you are writing that you lose all awareness of what's going on around you. And that's exactly what happened to me. I would be writing a story, an event, one of the chapters in my book, and it was amazing how much my brain would retain.
Yeah.
I could even see the colors.
Mm,
And there were times I smelled the smells. There
mm,
were times I came away from the story sweating with perspiration under arms and on my face.
mm.
It just was an experience to fall into the laptop.
Yeah.
And I thought this book, it would be a catharsis for me, and that it would help me to unpack this titanium steel trunk in the back of my mind. That's the way I talk about it.
Yeah.
It did not. It did not. It actually brought back all of the bad stuff that had been bothering me.
Yeah.
What has helped the most, and I'm sure you know this, what has helped the most is to talk about it.
Mm.
And I've participated and been interviewed in a lot of podcasts, and I've been doing face-to-face presentations. I've made presentations from 5 people to 300. And while it doesn't make it go away, it softens the edges.
Mm.
And that has been cathartic than actually writing the book.
Yeah, speaking it through your mouth. Yeah, for some people, the writing might have done that trick. I'm sure you've heard that a bunch of times, and so you thought that that would be truth for you. But for some people, it's speaking it. For some people, it's a type of therapy. Sometimes it's movement. Sometimes it's actually getting it out of the body. Different types of exercises. You hear this from runners a lot, that they process a lot while they're running. They have to be physically active to do it. So that is really beautiful that the speaking has been so helpful for you. And I'm very happy to be able to give you a platform to speak your story here. I'm wondering what you would say for people who might be struggling in your way with this titanium locked box of potentially very difficult, horrific things. What kind of encouragement could you give to them?
So this is one of my theme songs to the members of my New York, New Jersey chapter of the First Cav Division Association.
Mm,
And when I talk to other veterans who have these locked boxes in the back of their mind,
yeah.
and that is to talk to your family, to talk to your kids, to talk to other vets. If you can't talk to your family, then often you can talk to other vets who've had similar experiences because they were there and they had they witnessed and participated in some of the same things as you did. Now, some of these experiences are very horrific. I mean, if you have to kill someone up close and personal, it's the same kind of trauma that firefighters and police officers and EMS people have. When you see a body blown apart, it's very, very hard.
Yeah.
Then, like I said, you lock it away, and you cannot allow it to impact you. Especially if you're the leader of the group. You have to move on. You have to carry on. My favorite saying is good old John Wayne. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And that's kind of what, as a leader, you have to do.
Yeah. Robin, I appreciate you being on and sharing your story. Please tell people where they can find you, where they can find this beautiful memoir, where they can live with you and learn more about you.
So the easiest thing is just to Google my name. I've done a lot of social media. I have a website. And if you Google my name, Robin Bartlett, and not to be confused with a female actress by the same name, I'm male, she's female. So if you Google my name, you'll be able to go to my website, which is simply www.robinbartlettauthor.com. But the easiest way is just to Google my name and find my website. You can order my book there. I have videos online. I have photographs. I have blogs, a lot of information that's free and accessible. I've had lots of compliments on the website.
I love that. Thank you, Robin. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourself and your family.
I will. Thanks for having me on.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow. For any information that was discussed in this podcast episode, check out the show notes below. Until next time, be well.